The future is here, where thanks to the most recent AI developments, the online music business is going through an interesting shift. Labels can now generate their own AI artists, top to bottom basically, and artists can get massive assistance, both with the general artistic output and also with the corresponding content creation. This in effect means that the traditional arrangement of labels needing artists and artists needing labels is over as far as purely online business interactions go. Obviously, there's still tremendous advantage in joining forces, especially in offline situations, but as the landscape is changing, I'm now here to tell you about a few specific opportunities, and this is the first of many videos to come. I've been experimenting ever since the first platforms started offering various generative music production AI tools, but up until very recently they just weren't that great, to be honest, and overall the cons simply outweighed the pros in terms of integrating anything AI into a professional workflow at least. But this has all changed roughly 4 or 5 months ago when Suno launched its 4.5 model, which all of a sudden opened up very good commercial quality music generation for everyone. Even with the most recent 5.0 version, this is still obviously far from complete 100% perfection, but with a clever post-production workflow, it's now possible to reach a state where the average person listening through laptop or phone speakers won't ever be able to tell the difference between a human-made and an AI-made song, and even more importantly from our perspective, between a human singer and an AI singer. This gets us to the topic of this video, which is AI vocal generation. The technology is finally here, and I want to show you the two best workflows that you can take advantage of. Traditional separation method. As this name suggests, for our first workflow, we are going to generate a song and separate the created acapella from the rest of the instrumentation. Today, the best tool to use for this is Suno as far as the actual generation goes, because at the time of, making this video, it is the highest quality out of the many different AI music platforms. But before we would start, we'll need some lyrics, which is one of Suno's weakest points, to be honest, so unless you absolutely don't care about lyrics at all, I'd say it's much better to choose a different AI platform for this purpose. To make the workflow in this video easy to replicate, I'm going to use ChatGPT, but if you have access to a local open source model, let's say, that's probably an even better avenue for 100% unquestionable copyright ownership over the material. Just to quickly elaborate on this point, AI copyright legislation around the world is not the same and isn't even entirely clear in some cases. But to be safe right now, we have to kind of resort to at least a little bit of manual editing of the generated output to be able to claim copyright ownership, legally speaking. Now, you can obviously write your own lyrics too and just skip this step, but generating lyrics is an easier avenue in most cases, especially if you don't have sufficient songwriting experience. So first, we'll look for a song with a similar lyrical theme of what we are shooting for. I'm not showing the song I picked on purpose here, just so there's nothing dodgy on the screen, which, would get me in trouble. We'll look up the lyrics and copy-paste it into ChatGPT. Before the lyrics, we can write something along these lines. Can you please write a song in a similar style and similar tone and similar everything, but without using any of the lines directly? Ideally, while the imagery should be similar, it shouldn't remind the listener of any other song. Also here, we can specify not to use any cringe words. I, for example, always avoid baby or the Suno favorite shadow. I mean, shadow somehow always shows up in every Suno generation. So yeah, the prompt I'd use is, additionally, please make sure to exclude the following words from the lyrics and from the title entirely. First, shadow, second, baby, third, babe, fourth, etc. You get the point. Here we can also add any other instructions we might want to add, such as rhyming or evening outlines, which would be uneven in our reference song. On top of the generally better quality in terms of vocabulary, the other obvious benefit of generating the lyrics outside of Suno is that we get to direct the generation much closer towards our own taste. I would normally repeat this process 5 times or even sometimes 10 and choose my favorite outcome out of all of them, but for now let's just go with this one. Let's copy these lyrics into a text editor and let's edit a few things to be able to legally speaking call it ours. For quick and easy rhyme solutions, you can continue in ChatGPT prompting it to give you rhymes, etc., but I would rather recommend a manual solution here using RhymeZone. Let's use it in the context of this first verse. I'll delete this second line and copy-paste the last word from the first line into here and search, and we go to the advanced tab. Okay, so we would ideally look for something contextually appropriate, but no need to overthink this right now, so I'll just pick one and figure out a matching phrase with it. Obviously, if you're not happy with any other part of the generation, then just edit it further. Generally speaking, here we want a relatively monotone lyrical outcome, so I always try to keep the pre-choruses and the choruses completely identical throughout, and in most cases I'll opt for some matching lines in the verses already. Basically because this is what best guarantees that we will end up with at least one part of the generation which is gonna be good enough to copy-paste in case other parts would end up sounding just too artificial. More on this later. The point is that we now have our lyrics. Now comes the fun part. Let's copy-paste this into Suno and choose your target style. My pro tip here is to use the words minimal or sparse in the prompt to try to guide the generation towards less instrumental elements, just so the vocals will be easier for the algorithm to separate with the highest possible accuracy later on. Weirdness should be set to a low amount, once again, because we're shooting for as much clarity as possible. In my experience, somehow 0% always ends up worse than 3 or 4% though, so I usually leave it in this low one-digit zone. Then again, because the prompt already has what we want, we can turn this up above 90% and yeah, let's just generate some ideas. So I listened through them and picked my favorite melody / writing / arrangement idea. Quality or the tone of the delivery is not really important for now, so I'm only focusing on the actual melodies and rhythms and whether it's articulated in the same way how a human would articulate things. And the reason why initial quality doesn't really matter for us is because now we go ahead and separate the vocal from the instrumental elements, and for the best results, we'll do a little manual editing. Alternatively, if you're already happy with the progression, you can just download the song as is and go from there. But I just want to show you how to better tailor this towards your own taste, musically speaking. So we have these separated stems. Let's get rid of everything else other than the vocals, and let's see whether there's a better fitting chord progression than what Suno gave us.
One step short of losing control, running off the adrenaline alone. They say I'm loud, I'm out of line. I just don't fit.
After this, let's arrange the songwriting. Subsequent generations might still mess this up though, but still it's worth already kind of figuring this out in advance, just so we have a blueprint to revert to when we're actually working with the final material. A pro tip here is to export this using metronome clicking in the background to make sure that Suno understands our intention with the rhythms and the general arrangement. It won't really have any effect on the output. This step is again completely optional, but you can do 3 quick things to further guide the future generations towards better outcomes. First, I'll copy-paste parts of the vocal around. This is just to make sure that every word and every rhythm is as intelligible as possible. Second, I'll process the vocal a little, nothing too crazy. Again, the goal is just a little bit less artificiality. And third, I'll slightly lower the backing chords. Again, what I mentioned earlier is if you're already happy with Suno's progression, then there's no artistic or legal need to change it. So this is completely optional. In that case, you can just loop a part of the generated progression similarly to what I did here. Now let's get back to Suno and we are ready to feed it our reference material. Click on this audio button, choose the file and wait until the processing is finished. I'll make a separate video sometime about what to do when the upload fails because Suno insists on some kind of copyright problem, even though there's none. So yeah, everything's perfect and the lyrics are also automatically filled in. It's worth it to go through the lines once, just to make sure that everything's accurate. We'll use the style we actually want for the track, and whether you still want to use the words minimal or sparse depend on your future intentions. The more you want to keep from the AI instrumentation in the finished song, the less you want to avoid fuller generations, and vice versa. In this case, since I only care about the vocal, I'll still go with the minimal and sparse prompt. And again, I'm just gonna set these values similarly to how they were. And yeah, we can start generating. When working with this method, usually 1 out of every 10 is going to be good enough to use. So ideally, you should generate 20 or 30, maybe even 40 versions to be sure that at least one of them is going to be worth keeping. This procedure also largely comes down to your taste and how good is good enough for you. So in this case, I'm personally looking for a combination of 4 things. The first is an overall natural quality, which isn't overly artificial. A certain degree is inevitable, but the overall vibe shouldn't be directly robotic. Then I'm also looking for a relatively sparse instrumental without too much variation. Then a nice and consistent vocal tone, which is not too whiny, but also not too rigid, and as little reverb on the vocals as possible. Now, once we have chosen our favorite, there are only 2 things left to finish. The first is to separate the generation again into multiple parts, and the second is to touch the vocal up a little to reduce artificiality as much as this is possible. On this latter point, again, I'll expand in a later video. Nalestar comping method. I'm egoistic enough to name this after myself, but I genuinely believe I was the first to pioneer this avenue, so yeah, let's explore what this method entails. In advance, I have to say that this requires a lot more effort and other subscriptions, purchases, so outside of Suno. This is only for you if you really don't care about what it takes and only the result is what matters. The starting point is the same as it was using the traditional method. First thing is that we'll source the lyrics outside of Suno. The second thing is that we'll generate as many variations as we need to find the right starting point. And the third is that we'll separate the picked generation into pieces and download the results. But at this point, we have a double-edged problem to which we have to use a relatively sophisticated solution. The issue is on one side personal, on the other it's commercial. The generation we picked might be almost perfect, but it's possible that there are a few notes or even phrases where we don't exactly have what we would like to have. So to edit the pitch of one or two words, Melodyne or Ableton might actually solve our issues easily, but when it comes to whole phrases or the length of the words or other articulation issues, Ace Studio comes to the rescue to elaborate on the problem a bit further and to make the two sides explicit. On the artistic side, the output of every generation depends on the input training data, which in the case of Suno is generally speaking okay. However, for people who are trained in music theory and classical composition, well, certain melody lines might feel just simply out of context. So in these cases, these will require a little bit of editing. And still also on the artistic side, the generation is usually going to be perfectly pronounced English, but in a situation where everything's flawless otherwise and there's only one word which was mispronounced or rhythm-wise something's weird for a split second, it might not be worth to trash the whole generation as long as I can fix that one small little detail. Now on the other side, so on the commercial side of things, I'll do less and less, partly because my priorities are shifting and partly because mixing takes up a much larger piece of the pie at this point for me. But still, it's no secret that I'm every now and then involved with the productions of other people's songs. And a large part of what people are paying for is customizability. So it's not the music as is that's valuable. I mean, anyone can just generate whatever using Suno too. They don't need me for that. They kind of want to get an end result that they personally believe in. One aspect of this is that the vocals have to be at least somewhat flexible. So when a word or a melody or even a phrase needs replacing, but everything else is solid as a whole otherwise, there has to be a method to fix only those bits while leaving everything else, musically speaking, the same. So long story short, Ace Studio can help exactly with this. The workflow is pretty tedious if I'm being honest, and in general it's not the easiest software to learn to master, but I'm able to make very specific edits which might not be possible otherwise. Let me just show one quick example, making this word a bit longer.
Can you tell me why? Can you tell me why? Can you tell me why? Can you tell me why?
Now I'll edit this little snippet into the separated vocal, and once we are done, we continue with the business as previously. We will create a progression underneath, arrange the vocal structure to our liking, import it back to Suno, and generate a bunch of variations. But here, instead of picking one, I'll pick all that I think have good attributes. Even if it's just one phrase or one word that ended up pronounced specifically nicely, it already makes it worthwhile to use. I'll do this procedure by pinning the ones I like to the top, that way downloading will be easier too, and then yeah, I just download these one by one. Now we fire up Ableton or Logic or whichever DAW is your choice and reduce the length of the generated material to the minimum, meaning we'll leave only the length of the vocal parts for each version. And this is because we will be charged based on length moving forward. And as you might already suspect this, we will continue with vocal separation outside of Suno this time. Initially for this my main reason was cost effectiveness, because when I initially subscribed to the regular plan, 50 credits for every separation felt a little excessive frankly. But then Tekis showed me this MVSep platform, which ended up not only cheaper, but way better quality as well. And as with every separation, there's a ceiling here too, and it can only be as good as this process really can be. But regardless, it's audibly ahead of Suno. Not to mention the fact that here you can even separate the drums into kick or clap or hi-hats, etc. Expanding on this will be a topic for a different video about how to create custom sample packs out of AI generations. So we go ahead and batch import our exports from Suno, select this simple acapella/instrumental algorithm, and wait until the process is finished. With these vocal separations, it's time for the most important phase of this entire method, which is the voice changer. You can technically use any service or plugin for this, but the quality and the options you get are very different with each. My platform of choice here is Udemy, mainly for two reasons. The first is the intelligibility slider, which improves English pronunciation, and the second is the amount and the general quality of some of these voices. Much like with any other platform like this, there are hits and misses. So certain voices are better than what any human session singer would ever be able to do, while others even I would outdo while singing in the shower. So long story short, Udemy offers enough options for me to consider the platform worth using. Now we can import the vocals here. 5 is the maximum for each individual generation, which is not great, but yeah, we'll do this in batches. The goal is just to convert them all, so in the end we'll have a lot of variations to choose from. From the female voices, Vanessa is my current favorite, so let's go with her here too. Let's turn up this pronunciation help a little to around 50% is usually my choice. And let's also remove noise and reverb, and then we click the convert button. Then we wait, it takes a little while, but then we just download and repeat the process until we have everything. For the last step, we turn back again to your DAW of choice. I prefer Ableton personally for this because it offers the best audio editing options for this type of procedure, but any other DAW will work just fine as long as you're familiar with its audio editing capabilities. This procedure is called comping, and this is sometimes needed with 100% human productions too. So for example, when I get multiple vocal takes of the same lines, as the mixer, it's usually my job to find the best ones. This is important especially for lead vocals, where every word is always going to be on top and very clearly audible. And here we are in the exact same situation. So it's time to find the best bits and puzzle them together piece by piece. I usually do this on a separate day after all the preceding steps are already done to avoid making rushed decisions due to fatigue. I mean, let's be real, this method is pretty tedious and requires a lot of effort. But in the end, what we get is a crystal clear, clean vocal line like this.
Like 100 eyes, I don't know. Can you tell me why?
And the best part is that if there are still any words or phrases which you're not happy with after you've done with comping, you can just go back to Studio, adjust the details, convert it through Audemy, and you'll get the exact same voice to slot into the rest of the context. The ability of this sort of customization is what makes this method a game changer, for me at least. With Suno, you get a different voice with each generation, but here the voice is fixed, so there can't be any real inconsistencies. These vocals can be edited the same way how human vocals would be edited. Now, a question you might ask is, why even bother with Suno or Audemy when Studio can do all of this alone? To which my answer is simple. It would take ages. Studio is an indispensable tool for fixing a few bits which can be fixed otherwise, but in the context of an entire a cappella, proper editing would take me at least 3 days, 4 days maybe, if not more. And the voices are also okay-ish, but not exactly the same high quality what you would get with a different specialized platform such as Audemy. One minor caveat to add here is that the voice changer will try to adhere to the source. So if two sources have very different mid-ranges or high overtones, it might happen sometimes that after comping, I'll have two lines next to each other, which are not exactly 100% the same tone due to the brightness or some other difference of the two different inputs. In these cases, I'll simply rerun the voice changer over the whole comp to vocal, which will fix and uniformize the tone right away. So yeah, this is a long and relatively hard method, but it gives you the type of customization and control that an actual professional workflow requires. To wrap this video up with a summary of upsides and downsides. About the traditional separation method, the upsides are that Suno is the only subscription that's required, and it's relatively quick and easy to execute. The downsides are that there will be inevitable AI artifacts due to the generation itself and due to the separation. Another downside is that you'll be stuck with printed reverbs for the same reason as the above. There are no customization options after generating, so this might also be an upside as long as it's contextually appropriate, to be fair, but I'm gonna list this as a downside because in my experience the engine rarely finds the right balance. So this is the fact that you can achieve more realistic expressivity and dynamics, but this comes at the cost of potentially unknowingly out of context. Meaning there will be falsettos, for example, at places where the tone shouldn't change at all of a sudden there's gonna be a big dynamic jump up, again for no good reason. So I would recommend this method if you're a label owner or promoter who isn't actually a professional producer / engineer, but has some basic skills to slightly touch up these AI ideas and already has a network to push music created like this. Because for the average background music listener, this is already more than good enough. Actually, if you pay close attention, you can already see this executed by some early adopter labels. And when it comes to my method, the upsides are that there's not going to be any artifacts. I mean, if there's any, you can always just regenerate and reconvert until they disappear. There won't be any artificially printed reverbs on the vocals. This is going to be a highly customizable result every single time. There are also a few downsides, however. It's pretty tedious and very difficult to execute. Multiple subscriptions are going to be required for this, and again, this could be an upside or downside depending on what you value, but with this method, you're not going to get that wide range of dynamic expressions. But this also means it's safe from being out of context, which is what my personal goal is in most cases. Now, this method I would recommend to people like myself who values quality over everything else. The effort and experience and investment required here are all relatively high, but in the end, this is the only method which can satisfy both my personal and my commercial needs. And yeah, you know the drill. Like, comment, subscribe, bell, and all these things. Thanks for watching.